Hello, everyone. I hope you are all doing well. Welcome to the National Support Session for your exam, where I will be taking you through the 2024 paper. As you can see, it's projected up on the screen, and I'm going to be breaking this up into three sessions. Where in the first session, I'm going to be covering questions 1 to 3. In the second session, questions 4 to 6, and then in the last, questions 7 to 9. So there are 9 questions in total. I've broken it up into 3 questions per recording just to make it easier for you instead of just having one large recording and having like a whole batch of information. I'm just separating it so it's easier to digest and it is obviously small bits of information at a time. So let's get started. And the first thing that I wanted to point out to you is the mark allocation, which does show 120, which was last year. But remember, as of this year, the mark allocation has changed. So it is no longer 120 marks, it is now 100 marks for your exam. So please make note of that. It's great for you because the time allocation stays the same. So it's no longer a mark a minute, it's actually more than a minute per mark. So that's really great for you because it obviously then takes off a little bit of the pressure in terms of time wise versus mark allocation. So just remember 100 marks. So, in terms of the additional instructions that you see at the bottom, I'm going to quickly read through them and just add in bits of information here and there. The first point says to you that this is a closed book assessment, which we obviously already know. This goes without saying. Your exam is a closed book assessment, and you are obviously having to learn all of your content. Then it says that calculators are allowed, which is amazing again, because obviously you use your scientific calculators for most of the things that we'll be looking at. Then it says for multiple choice questions, give only one response and the marker will ignore anything that has more than one response. So basically the first answer will be marked as correct or incorrect. So this I will also speak to more when we look at question 1. So we'll get back to that one later on. Then the fourth point says this assessment consists of 4 sections, and you are required to answer all 3 questions in section A and 1 question each from section B, C, and D. So in total, you would have answered a total of 6 questions. Now, this is something that I will speak to more on this side of the screen just now. So we'll also come back to that. Then it says that there is a formula sheet that's attached to this paper. It will be exactly the same formula sheet as was in your assignment 2. So if you want, you can go back to your assignment 2 question paper and have a look at the formula sheet. It's exactly the same. Remember, Learning Unit 5 is not included in the formula sheet. So you have to learn all of the formula in that learning unit. Also, there is a statistical table. As you know, there are 3 statistical tables that are included from your textbook that will be attached at the end of the formula sheet as well. So your formula sheet is definitely a plus for you. Obviously, certain things that you will be answering, you don't have to learn the formulas for them, but naturally you still do need to know the application of those formulas. So please remember, Learning Unit 5 not included. The rest of them are there, but obviously you do need to know how to apply them. Then it says that you would need to show all of your calculations because there are marks that are potentially awarded to these. Honestly, from my side, excuse me, I would say just show working out always because there are marks allocated throughout, there are method marks allocated throughout. It is a numeracy module, so you don't want to unnecessarily miss out on marks. Where it is possible for you to not show working out, that's fine, and I will show you that as we go along. I will indicate to you that, look, this is a particular question where you don't have to show every single working out, and this is where you can leave out the working out and so on. But for the majority of it, and just as a general rule, when it comes to stats, you would need to show all of your methods and your marking. Sorry, your mark in order to get the marks. Okay, then the next point says to you, give all of your final answers to two decimal places unless indicated otherwise. And this also ties in with the next point, so I'll discuss both of them together. The next one says, in the case of probability questions, please ensure that your final answers are percentages to two decimal places unless they've indicated otherwise. So these 2 points go hand in hand, where the general rule is that your answers should always be a two decimal place figure. However, only for the probabilities for the probability section, you would need to ensure that it's still two decimals but as a percentage. Now, please make sure that you pay attention to this, because this is something that is honestly beyond the control of your lecturer. Because these are exams, they get moderated. So if you leave something as a fraction where it should have been a percentage, you are unfortunately going to lose the mark. You probably will get the mark for the actual initial answer, but the final mark where you are required to convert that to a percentage, you're going to lose out on that mark. So please remember that we are not in control of this. Unfortunately, we will not be able to allocate the mark if you convert something to a fraction and you don't leave it as a percentage. You're going to lose out on that mark. So please make sure you pay attention to that. Okay, then on the right-hand side, as I said earlier, I'll come back to this. We have the layout of your paper. So it says that it's important to know that this exam consists of 4 questions, section A, B, C, and D. And section A is entirely compulsory. There are 3 questions in the section, and they've said to you here, you are required to answer all of them. Now, remember, and this is something that they said under the additional information as well, that in total you are required to answer 6 questions. So question 1, and I'm just going to write it out here. Okay, so 6 questions in total. Now, immediately after answering section A's questions, you've eliminated the first 3, meaning you have now been able to say, I have answered 3 questions in this exam. But we know that there's obviously 6, so there's still 3 more to go. So this is where section B, C, and D come in. Section B, C, and D all have 2 questions within them. You are only required to answer 1 question per section. So section B will have 2 questions, you will answer only 1. So when you're done with section B, you're basically ticking off here number 4, and you're able to say, I have now answered 4 questions in my exam. Then the same with section C. You're going to answer 1 question only. There are 2 questions, but you will select one of them. And then when you're done with section C, you can also say, I have now answered 5 questions in total in my exam. And then you have the last section, section D, where you're now again looking at 2 questions, but you will answer only one of them. And once you're done with this, you will now be able to tick off the last one. And in total, you now have answered 6 questions in your exam. And this then ties up with the last point here at the bottom that says, in total, you should have answered 6 questions upon completion of the exam. All right, so this is now the structure, the layout of your exam. Let's have a look at question 1. So I'm going to point out what the question is based on, what learning unit it's based on. And section A here is now your compulsory section. So in this recording, remember, I'm going through questions 1, 2, and 3. So these are all of your compulsory questions in your exam. So you can highlight or make note at the top here that this says to you, answer all of your questions in this section. And question 1 is based on learning unit 1. So I'm just going to write that here. Okay, So, learning unit one is, remember, just your theory. So, it's just a whole lot of concepts, basic definitions, and so on. And the way in which they have put together the questions here is very similar to your assignment one, where question 1.1 is just five multiple choice questions, and question 1.2 is your matching column X with column Y. So the way in which they've asked for you to answer this is in your answer booklet, simply write down the number. For example, you'll say 1.1.1, and then you'll indicate that the respective answer is either 1, 2, 3, or 4. So please do not write out the whole word. Don't write out a sentence or a word of what that respective answer is, literally only the number or the alphabet. So let's look at question one. So question 1.1.1 says the number of sheep in a field is an example of. So this would be quantitative immediately, meaning it has to be a number. It cannot be a category or a list of information. So we immediately then can eliminate number 1 and 4 as potential answers. Those are not possibly the answers here. So you can immediately eliminate number 1, eliminate number 4. So then it's definitely number 2 or 3. And remember, this is a number of sheep, meaning it cannot be decimals, fractions, and so on. So that also eliminates number 3, which leaves us with number 2 as your correct answer here. So as I said, in your exam booklet, in your answer booklet, you're going to write down next to 1.1.1 that the answer here is 2. And then you have the rest of them that will follow like that. So question 1.1.2 says the strongest form of data with regards to statistical analysis. And this is your ratio scaled data. So your answer here is number 1. And again, in your answer booklet, you'll just show 1.1.2 and you'll say that your answer is number 1. Then question 1.1.3 says if we measure the rainfall in Nelspruit every day for a period of 6 months, then this will generate, and your answer here is ratio scale data. So again, you'll write down 1.1.3 and your answer will be number 3. And you'll continue like that. So I'll just highlight for the rest of them. Then 1.1.4 says categorical data, where there is an implied ranking between the values, is referred to as. So where there is an implied ranking is ordinal data. So that's number 4. And then question 1.1.5, your last multiple choice question, says data recorded for the first time at source can be high quality, time consuming to collect, expensive to collect, or all of the other options. And your answer here is all of the other options. All right, so that's question 1.1.1, your multiple choice questions. Then you have question 1.2, which is your matching column X with column Y. So column X has your explanation, and then the actual term is in column Y. So the first one says 1.2.1 condenses sample data into a few summary measures. So this would be descriptive statistics. And again, when you're answering this, you'll say in your answer booklet 1.2.1, close your brackets, and then you would say your answer is C. So you'll just write down C. Then you'll just continue like that, 1.2.1, 1.2.2, 1.2.3, and so on. Then 1.2.2, so we can eliminate C. 1.2.2 says it describes a characteristic of a population. This would be a parameter. So this is A, so you'll write down A. Then 1.2.3 says the analyst manipulates certain variables under controlled conditions. And this is experimentation, so that is D. And then 1.2.4 is any attribute of interest on which data is collected and analyzed. This is a random variable, so that would be E. And the last one would naturally then be the only outstanding answer. But either way, if you look at the definition, it says categorical data where there is an implied ranking. So where there is an implied ranking, which was actually the same as question 1.1.4 here, is ordinal scale data. So this would be B. All right, and that is question 1, done and dusted. So let's move on to question 2. So question 2 is based on learning unit 2 as well. It's based on your index numbers. And there are 3 questions here, as you can see. And as I mentioned earlier, please don't pay attention to the mark allocation of this paper, because this was last year where the mark allocation was still out of 120, but it will no longer be 120. So since it's out of 100 now, you will find that certain questions might not have the same mark allocation as they did last year. So please do bear in mind that this is the mark allocation for last year. Okay, so this is based on Learning Unit 2, as I pointed out. And remember, Learning Unit 2 is based on your index numbers. So it says to you, the following table indicates the unit prices in rand and quantities of 3 products that were sold by Better Bathrooms for the month of Jan and March 2024. So they've given you the information in the table, and as always, the earlier year is always your base year, or the earlier month in this case, which is January, is your base period, and then the latter is your current. So that would make January the base, and March would be your current period. So they've given you respectively the base price and quantity is P0 and Q0, and the current price and quantity is P1 and Q1. Question 2.1 then says, using Jan as your base period, compute the price relatives in March 2024 for basins and taps. So they want you to compute the price relatives and only for 2 products, basins and taps, and then interpret your answers. So here you would need to firstly identify what is the price relative formula that I'm working with. It is in your formula sheet. And then remember, don't forget that it's only for 2 items, so you're not doing it for all 3. And then also don't forget to interpret your answer. So price relative formula, remember, is P1 over P0, and it's multiplied by 100. So you're calculating this for only basins and taps. So I'm going to write it on this side at the top, and then I'll erase in case I need space. So basins, you're looking at and I'm just going to write that out here. Okay, so it's P1 over P0, and it's multiplied by 100. So here is your P1 column, and here is your P0. So P1 for basins is 549.4, and P0 is 557. So you're going to say 549.4 over 557 multiplied by 100, and that is 98.64. Then the next one, so I'll come back to the interpretation in a second. Let's just do the value first. Let's do the working out first. So taps would be your next one, and taps is just below that. So this is P1 and this is P0, and they look very similar to each other. So P1 is 240.5. And P0 is 242.5, and that's multiplied by 100, and that would give you 99.18. So now that you're done with the answers for them, let's look at interpreting. So the interpretations are pretty straightforward. You're literally just explaining what the change was, whether it was an increase or decrease, and over what period it had increased or decreased. So basins, for example, you will say that, remember, this is based on price. So you will say the price of basins increased. Actually, sorry, this was a decrease since it was less than 100. So the prices of basins decreased by, and you work out the difference between 100 and the 98.64. So it decreased by 1.36% between Jan and March of 2024. And that's your interpretation. All right, and the same for taps. You're going to say that the prices of taps, in this case, also a decrease. So it decreased by, and the difference between 100 and the 99.18 is 0.82%. And then it's between Jan and March 2024. And that's your interpretation. So that's question 2.1 done. So the next one, 2.2, is based on the Las Perez price index. So this says to you, using Jan 2024 as the base period, compute the Las Perez price index for all of the products for March 2024 and again interpret your answer. So remember, your Las Perez price index is also in your formula sheet. The formula for it is included, so it is the sum of P1 times Q0 over the sum of P0 times Q0, and it's multiplied by 100. So I'm just going to draw a line to separate here, and then it's literally just doing this whole thing as one formula and then multiplying it by 100. Please, please, please remember here, there is no other way of doing this except the one that I am showing you. You cannot do each one individually and then add them up. You cannot do just the numerator and just the denominator and so on. This is the easiest way. It's the most simplest way. It's the most correct way. So please follow exactly this method of doing it and no other method. All right, so let's calculate this. So from the table, let's look at which columns we're actually working with here. So I'm just going to backtrack a bit and erase all of this. And let's look at and highlight which columns we're looking at first. So it's P1 times Q0 in the numerator. So it's P1, all of the figures here, and then Q0, all of the figures here. So remember, we're doing it for each item individually and then adding it up. So for the first one, it's 549.4 times 395. So 549.4 times 395 plus. The next one is 240.5 times 760. And then the last item is 1,503.7 multiplied by 415. And that's your numerator done. Now in the denominator, and I find that this is the easiest way to teach students and also for you to just remember that in the numerator and the denominator of this equation, it said Q0, if you look at the part that I'm highlighting, and Q0 in both the numerator and the denominator. So the easiest thing is, before even putting in the first part of the formula, immediately put in the Q0. This does not change at all for all three products. So immediately you can just put in the Q0. Just repeat it from the top because it does not change, as you can see. The only thing that is now changing is instead of using P1 in the formula, we're using P0. So here is P0, the one I'm highlighting here. And now you can go ahead and just enter the P0 for each item. So for the first item, for example, it's 557. For the second item, it's 242.5. And the third item is 1507.7. Sorry, that got a bit squashed there. And now you're done. Your final answer here is 99.40. And now to interpret, you're going to say on average, remember that's a key word that you need to use in your interpretation. So you'll say on average, the prices of the items, in this case, it decreased because it's below 100. So they decreased by 0.6% between Jan and March 2024. And this is whilst holding, and don't forget about this part, you're holding your quantity constant at its base level. And that's question 2.2 done. All right, so let's do question 2.3 now on this side. So this then says to you in question 2.3 that still using Jan as your base period, which is always the case in this question because it is the earlier period, compute the partial price index for all of the products for March 2024 and interpret your answer. So the partial price index is almost the same, just one slight difference where it is now Q1 that we hold constant. So it's P1 times Q1 over the sum of P0 times Q1, and it's multiplied by 100. So once again, this is also in your formula sheet. So you don't have to worry about learning the formula, but obviously again, the application of it is what's necessary. So here it's P1 times Q1. So let's highlight in the table which are the respective columns. So P1 is here. It's basically just the last two columns times Q1, which is right next to it. So for each item, we're going to note that. So 549.4 for the first item times its respective quantity of 400. Then the next item is 240.5 times 800. And the last one is 1503.7 times 440. Please excuse my writing. I honestly do generally write really neatly, even if I say so myself. But because the screen is so sensitive, if I'm pressing too hard on the screen, it's skipping to the next slide and then it's removing all of the work. So unfortunately, I'm having to like sort of write on my tippy fingers just so that I'm not touching the screen unnecessarily. So please do excuse my writing. All right, so the denominator, remember what stays the same is the Q1, the second part of the formula. So I'm immediately then just entering the Q1 values and then we'll amend the P value. So the P value is now your P0. So it's 557, then 242.5, and 1507.7. And now when you put this onto your calculator, it's 99.41. All right. And your interpretation. So I'm actually going to use the interpretation from here and just amend keywords. But what I'm going to do is change the color of the word so that we can look at how it's different from the previous one. So let's make this blue. Okay, so the interpretation will still say on average, the prices of the items, it's still decreased. So we're still going to say decreased here by, this time it's by 0.59% between Jan and March 2024, whilst holding your quantity constant. This time it's at the current levels, at the current period levels. Okay, and that is question 2.3. All right, so we're done with question 1 and 2. Let's look at the last one for this recording, which is question 3. So question 3 is based on learning unit 4. This is your linear regression and correlation analysis. And again, this is for 20 marks. It's just because, again, last year it was 120. It was an equal split across the 6 questions you have to answer. So again, this might change. So this says to you, the following table indicates the ages of a particular model of SUV and the corresponding market value in thousands of rands. And they've given you the information in the table below. There are 5 different values. So at the moment, immediately, I'm going to write down that n is equal to 5. Then it says by completing the table below, so there's 3 parts to this, and please pay attention to this because many people made this mistake in the assignment. They said to you, complete the table. That's the first thing you would need to do. And this is only question 1, remember, 3.1. Complete the table, and then, and I'm just going to highlight here, apply the relevant formula. So this is part 2, and then determine what your line of best fit is. And that's part 3. So there are 3 parts just to this one question, which you can see is then in line with the mark allocation of 12. So please remember that you need to first complete the table, then apply the formulas and calculate the values of A and B, and then put that into your linear regression equation, your line of best fit, basically. So they also said to you, note, please do not change the units for the variables. No marks will be awarded if the table is not completed. Please pay attention to that. Once again, it is an exam. It does get moderated. So we have no leeway in terms of giving you marks if you have not actually shown something. So here they've given you the table, what you need to complete, and this is the values of x, y, x squared, and xy, which we're going to reconstruct. Please do not change any of the values that you see in the table. Don't add the zeros and make it thousands. It is not necessary. Also, do not add a column for y squared. A lot of people did this for the assignment. It is not necessary. It is not required. There is no mark allocated to it. And this just means that you then would have done the wrong thing for question 3.3. Okay, please make sure to pay attention to this. Do not add in any additional information in the table except for what they asked you for. Remember, they gave you the template, meaning they did not have a column for y squared here. So you cannot include a column for y squared. So I'm going to redraw this on the right-hand side here. We have a column for x, y, x squared, and xy. So again, Do not include any additional columns except for the ones that they had given you in the table, and also do not change the values that were given to you. So your age in years was 3, 5, 8, 12, and 17. Also, remember you must add on a line at the bottom, an additional row for your totals. So the Y values then, just to copy them, is 425, 415, 400, 350, and 295. Then remember x squared is to just square all of the x values. So 3 squared is 9, 5 squared 25, 8 squared 64, 12 squared 144, and 17 squared is 289. Then xy means you're literally just multiplying each x value by its respective y value, like so. So 3 times 425 is 1275, then 2075, 8 times 400 is 32, 12 times 350 is 42, and the last one is 5015. So now when you sum up these values, the sum of x is 45, the sum of y is 1885. The sum of x squared is 531, and the sum of xy is 15,765. All right, so that is basically completing the table, which was part 1 here. Now we need to apply the relevant formula, which means we need to calculate the values of A and B. Remember, B is always calculated first, and the formula for this is in your formula sheet, but I'm just going to write it out roughly here. So it's n multiplied by the sum of xy minus the sum of x times the sum of y over n multiplied by the sum of x squared minus the sum of x then squared. So let's fill that in. So n, remember I said to you earlier, is 5, and it's multiplied by the sum of xy from the last row here is, sorry, supposed to be highlighting and I mistakenly wrote. So it's 15,765. So it's 5 multiplied by the 15,765. Then it's minus the sum of x, which is 45, multiplied by the sum of y, which is 1885. Then it's over n again, 5 multiplied by, remember, it is the sum of x squared, which is this one, the 531. So multiplied by 531. Okay, so I need to erase that. So 531 minus, now the sum of x is literally your sum of x here, 45, and that's squared. Okay, so this gives you a value of minus 9.52 for B. So minus 9.52, and now we can use that in the formula for A, which is why A can only be done after B, because it's the sum of y minus B times the sum of x over n. So the sum of y is the 1885 minus b is minus 9.52. And this is times the sum of x, which is 45. And this is over n, which is 5. So this gives you 462.68. And now that is step 2 done. And now the third part of the question is to literally put that into the formula, which would now say y is equal to 462.68. Remember, it's y is equal to a, and I'm just going to write down the formula here. Y is equal to a plus bx. So a was 462.68 plus, but remember b is a minus, so it'll actually be minus 9.52x. And that is now the full question 3.1 done. All right, now let's look at question 3.2. So question 3.2 says if the SUV is 15 years of age, 15 years of age, estimates its current market value. So remember, age is the X variable in the formula. So all you have to do is now for question 3.2, let's do that at the bottom here. For question 3.2, sorry, I'm trying to erase. All you have to do is just rewrite the formula that we just calculated and replace the x with 15, because now we are changing the x variable to look at what the outcome will be on the y variable. So y is equal to 462.68 minus 9.52, and instead of writing x, replace it with 15 and now calculate your answer, which would be 319.88. Now remember, this 319.88 is a rand value. It's in thousands of rands. So you need to now multiply this. I'm just going to write it down here in small, but you don't need to actually write that down. All you need to do is remember that it's 319.88 multiplied by 1000. As I said, you don't need to write down this multiplied by 1000. I'm just writing it here to teach it to you so that you know it for your exam. But you just then need to show the final answer, which will be 319,880. So if the SUV is 15 years of age, its estimated market value would be 319,880 Rand. And that's question 3.2 done. And for the last question for the session, it says use your calculator and compute the coefficient of determination for the data set and interpret your answer. So what's important here is, firstly, they told you use your calculator, meaning you cannot use the formula to calculate this value. Please remember that you will not get the mark at all for using the formula. So please follow the instruction. So this is now using your calculator worksheet. You're going to follow the calculator worksheet to calculate the coefficient of determination. Remember, your calculators will only give you the value of r, whilst this question is actually r squared. The coefficient of determination is r squared. So if you follow your worksheet, remember you have to change the mode at the top right hand corner to the one that says, well, to stats mode. So you'll press mode, change it to stats mode, choose the option that says a plus bx. It will give you a screen that shows a column for x and a column for y. So you'll enter all of your x values. You'll press 3 equal to 5 equal to 8 equal to 12 equal to 17 equal to. Then use the arrows to navigate to the y column. Then you'll enter each y value, 425 equal to, 415 equal to, and so on. Once you're done, press AC, shift the number 1, choose the option that says REG, and then the option that says R. So on your calculator, it will be R, and you press equal to, and this gives you a value for R, which is minus 0.99. You'll write it down because there is a mark allocation for this. So you'll write down R is equal to minus 0.99, and then you can change your mode on your calculator back to the normal comp mode. So press mode and choose comp mode, and then you'll type in on your calculator minus 0.99 squared and multiply it by 100, and this will now give you R squared, which is 98.01%. And that now is your value of your coefficient of determination. Now, how do we interpret that? I'm just going to erase a bit here so we can interpret. Your interpretation is going to be that the variation or the change in the age of the SUV explains 98.01% of the variation in the market value. Remember, it's basically saying that the variation in the X variable explains this much variation in the Y variable. It's basically looking at the extent to which a change in your X variable explains a change in the Y variable. So the variation in the age of the SUV, or the change in the age of the SUV, explains 98.01% of the variation in the market value. All right, that's it for now. I will be sending you through the next recording as soon as I'm done with that. Happy studying.